Welcome back to Logan Rando Aquascaping. My name is Logan, and today I am super excited to walk you guys through the full setup process of my UNS 45U Iwagumi. So this has been weeks and weeks in the making. I've been working on the hardscape for a really long time. I've gotten a bunch of great feedback from some friends, and along the journey, I've learned a lot about how to create an impactful aquascape, especially when you're dealing in the space of an Iwagumi, because every little stone matters, and I've learned so much. So before we dive right into the build, I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of today's video. That's Buce Plant. They provided me with the soil, all of the plants, as well as the glass and light for this build. So super appreciative. If you want to get your hands on any of these materials, go ahead and visit buceplant.com or check the links in my video description. Now let's get started. So the foundation of any good aquascape is a really strong hardscape. And I really wanted to spend a lot of time creating what I initially envisioned to be a classic Iwagumi. But as you'll notice throughout the build, this sort of initial vision evolved and became more complex. And I'm happy to say that I do think the scape turned out all the better for it. So like any good layout, you start with a really high quality substrate. And today I'm using UNS Controsoil. This is the brown variety. And what you want to do is just lay down a generous but not too thick layer, and then slope that towards the back. So why do we slope it toward the back? Well, by sloping substrate and banking it up a little bit higher in the back, we create what's called forced perspective, and things look a little bit bigger than they actually are. So when you have that higher slope in the way back and a lower foreground, it makes the scape seem like it has a lot more depth than it already does. Once the soil was in place, it was time to find the positioning of the mother stone. And if you're not familiar with an Iwagumi, you always have a mother stone, and that just means it's the key piece. It's that key stone that is typically the largest, and it's gonna really draw the viewer's eye. So with this being such a large stone in this little 45 centimeter tank, I knew it would need some great support. So I actually laid down that supporting stone first and used it to provide a little bit of stability for the large mother stone. And from that point on, it was a lot of playing around with the angle and making sure that the center of mass of that stone aligned really nicely with the left third of the tank. If you're not familiar with the concept of the golden ratio and the rule of thirds, next time you do an aquascape, make sure you're an expert on this concept, because this is going to guide the placement of many of your stones. And basically the way it works is that humans' eyes are drawn to these key points. And if you divide an aquascape up into a grid with these lines, you'll see that there are key points. So you always want to make sure that your key points align at least somewhat closely with these little intersections. And that's going to create something that is a lot more harmonious and pleasing to the eye. Once the mother stone and the secondary supporting stone was in place, from that point, it was a lot of playing. And this is where doing an Iwagumi is very difficult and just requires a lot of patience and experimentation, almost like you're a child playing with Legos. You kind of just put stuff in, see what works, snap things together, and occasionally break it all apart and start again. So I did that a lot, and I was really working hard to balance things out because there's so much density and weight to that main stone. The goal is to provide some visual support and sort of take the eye on the journey. So after a 2.5 hour session of just kind of playing, stepping back and observing, I left it at this, and I decided to make an Instagram post and get a little bit of feedback from my friends. So after gathering all that feedback and hearing what people thought, I knew I needed a little bit more support, and I knew I needed to take the eye on a little bit more of a cohesive journey. And that's where I'm really grateful for my good friend and colleague, Jutjajevs. He has an amazing aquascaping channel. If you don't follow it, I'll go ahead and link his channel down below in the description. But he gave me some excellent feedback, and he was kind enough to actually mock up a little bit of a drawing to show me what I was missing and to show me how to add support and make the scape more appealing to the eye. So I really studied his drawing, and then I went back in with some more hardscape, and I got to work and put in another 2.5 hour session, and this is what I came up with. And you can see it is a massive improvement. The primary points I took away from Jurijs' guidance are that it's often really good to silhouette your large stones, especially if they're in the mid-ground. So By silhouetting them and providing some supporting stones that are much smaller in the back, you provide enhanced depth and also visual support, because very rarely in nature do we just see these large, isolated, heavy structures, especially when it comes to mountains and stones, which we're essentially trying to emulate here with an all-stone Iwagumi. So by providing that visual support in the background and all around the major stones, it just looks so much more natural. And after one more round of feedback and revisions and modifications, I ultimately came up with this. I made some very minor tweaks, especially by providing some support to that secondary stone all the way on the right, and then just adjusting the background rocks a little bit. And at this point, the tank was ready for planting, and I was so excited because this is my absolute favorite part of the process. I feel like hardscaping and the whole process behind that is almost like building a house. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and you know it's gonna lead to something amazing, but you really gotta suffer to get to the point of where we're at now. And the planting is kind of just relaxing. You put on some music and it's like painting. And once again, I gotta give Jurijs a huge thanks. I let him know what I was thinking with my plants, and I asked him, hey, where would you put the Eleocharis? Because I wasn't quite sure what key points it should really be used in. And he was kind enough to mock me up a little bit of a drawing right here, and this really helped guide me. So I can't thank him enough. And one of the key things I learned from this is it is just so valuable to have a mentor. That pretty much goes for any sort of hobby, whether you're a guitarist, a singer, a painter, a pianist, or an aquascaper. It's just really nice to have somebody who's really good at the craft offer some guidance. So today I am happy to be working with UNS tissue culture plants from Buce plant. They came in such beautiful quality. We've got Micranthemum, Tweedii, Monte Carlo, we've got Hemianthus, Cuba, and we've got Eleocharis belem. And these three plants are really classic carpeting plants for an Iwagumi. And what I'm doing is I'm starting with the Eleocharis and I'm placing it in key points. So that's primarily in the midground, parts of the background as well, to just kind of like silhouette the stones, wrap around the stones, and guide the eye a little bit. Because with the shorter carpeting plants, things can look a little bit more like a monoculture and a little bit flat. So the Eleocharis breaks things up and adds that sort of nature's chaos vibe. Once all the Eleocharis was in place, it was time to add the Monte Carlo. And as you can see, I started off planting the Monte Carlo like you would any sort of stem plant, but then I remembered, oh, hey, this is Monte Carlo. It's super easy to work with. It's super versatile. You can kind of just pop this stuff in because I'm doing a dry start, which means that the tank won't be flooded for a few weeks. The plants will be allowed to grow, root, and develop in their immersed form, and then eventually we'll flood it. So when you're doing a dry start, you can actually chop Monte Carlo up, rip it up, and just kind of drop it firmly onto the soil, and the roots will find their way. Once all of the Monte Carlo was in place, things were really starting to shape up, and it was time to introduce the Hemianthus Cuba. And if you're not familiar with this plant, it's very similar to Monte Carlo, a little bit more demanding, definitely will benefit from CO2, whereas Monte Carlo might be able to get by without it. However, the foliage and leaf structure is much smaller and more petite. So I'm strategically using it in the midground and background to enhance that sense of depth. We have large rocks, large foliage in the front, small rocks, small foliage in the back, and this all adds up together, as well as with that banked up substrate to create that forced perspective that we talked about earlier. So that's what I did. I got the Hemianthus Cuba in there, and at this point, everything was nice and covered, and we were in a really good place to get this dry start initiated. So you may be watching this video asking yourself, man, do I really need all those plants? Well, it really depends on what your goals are, depends on how patient you are, but I will tell you this, when you're setting up a new aquascape, one of the absolute best things you can do is invest in a lot of healthy, high quality plant mass, because that's gonna help you avoid those early algae stages, those early diatom outbreaks. The more plants you add from day one, the higher your chances of success from the get-go are. Now, let's say you're on a tighter budget, maybe you're a student or money's a little bit tight for you, you could probably get by with half the plant mass I used, but you're really gonna have to be diligent about your water changes, you're gonna have to be diligent about your maintenance, and you have to be prepared to potentially fight an algae battle. This is where maybe once you flood the tank, adding some floating plants can help you, sort of eat up some of those waste organics. But if you have the budget and you want sort of instant visual impact as well as high chances of success, plant as densely as you can from day one. And the cool thing about the tissue culture is they may look small, but they're so densely packed and you can really spread things out. So that's what I did, and we pretty much have complete coverage of the soil. So thank you so much for watching the full step-by-step process of how I set up this 45U dry start Iwagumi. I've got a couple questions for you. Number one, when I flood this bad boy, which will probably be a month or two from now, I'm still waiting for the beautiful piano black UNS stand that this is gonna go on. I'm curious, what type of fish do you think I should add? What color, what species? What do you think is really gonna look good in this scape? I'd love to know. And then next up, what do you think I should name this scape? So let me know down below in the comments. As always, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe because I'm gonna have constant updates on this tank, and I'm gonna take you on the whole journey of the ups and downs, and we're gonna learn a lot along the way. So you don't wanna miss out on that. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys and girls next time.